Well, those charges announced by Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein are actually the first connected to Russian interference in the 2016 election. And while our intelligence agencies have said for months that Russia meddled, we haven't known until now just how pervasive that effort was. Starting here with social media, that effort included the use of social media. There were so-called specialists allegedly creating fake accounts that appeared to belong to Americans. And according to the indictment, these specialists would create groups about hot-button issues like immigration to generate chaos. They would also spread hashtags promoting Donald Trump and disparaging Hillary Clinton. Identity theft here. Russians not only posed as Americans, they also pretended to be real Americans. The indictment accuses them of stealing Social Security numbers, addresses, and other personal information to open bank accounts, which they would then use to buy ads on social media. It also used them to buy signs, flags, and banners, and they would use those at rallies they organized. That takes us to what may be here the most stunning allegation, that Russians used Americans as political pawns in this effort. Those specialists pretended to be grassroots activists. They would organize political rallies. You can see this guy here outside a Trump rally in Pennsylvania 1 month before the election. Well, the Justice Department says Russians paid him to be there dressed like that. For more, I'm joined by Ken Delaney. He's NBC's News, Intelligence and National Security reporter. Joining me from Washington, John Cipher is a former senior CIA officer who ran operations in Russia. He now writes for the national security website, The Cipher Brief. And Yodit Tewolde is a former prosecutor, now a defense attorney and a legal analyst. Ken Delaney, let me start with you. You and I were talking yesterday afternoon, shortly after this indictment was handed up. We were going through it in real time. You've now had the benefit of a day to go through it. What's the takeaway here? I'm amazed still just by the size, the magnitude, how intricate this apparatus, this information apparatus is.
It is amazing, David, and it really fundamentally changes our understanding of what the Russians did here. You know, up until now, we knew that the intelligence community had said the Russians interfered and meddled in the election, and we knew there was a lot of social media manipulation, and we knew that there was some hacking and leaking, which is not addressed in this indictment. But we had no idea that there was a budget of more than $15 million a year by the count of this indictment, that Russian operatives were infiltrating the United States and speaking to unwitting Americans, that they were setting up more than a dozen rallies in swing states. It's just an incredibly elaborate foreign intelligence operation against our democracy. They took advantage of our open system. They took advantage of our social media. There's also a really important legal question that was answered here, which is what people have long asked, what is the crime here? There is no crime of collusion with a foreign power. What are the potential crimes? And Robert Mueller has answered that question by laying out a complex conspiracy to defraud the United States, to violate election law. And now the question is, were any Americans witting participants in that conspiracy, including any members of the Trump campaign, David?
John Cipher, I want to draw from your experience with the CIA and just ask you how novel what you saw described in this indictment is when you look at the kind of meddling that was allegedly happening in the U.S. Is this textbook? Is this something that governments would do and maybe do around the world?
Well, actually, when I read it, I realized it sounded kind of fun. You know, having people come in, work their way around the country, use false names, set up false companies, you know, manipulate people to achieve your goals. So in some ways, you know, this indictment is a serious legal document, but for the Russians, there's probably a lot of people over there that are pretty proud of what they did. And they realize, you know, they did it for intelligence purposes. It's part of an information warfare campaign, and so I bet you they're pretty proud of what they did.
Yodit Tewolde, I saw a quote here from Bob Litt, who was a former general counsel to the director of national intelligence, and he described this as a message document. This is sending a message here. It's unlikely that a lot of the folks named in this indictment are going to face a judge or a jury here. What's your takeaway in that regard? What's the point of seeing all of these names named?
Well, you know, with federal indictments, they're supposed to give the accused enough notice, enough information to let them know the nature and the cause of the crime charged. Here, we have indictments that are so lengthy, so detailed, so full of facts that it's almost as if Mueller is trying to speak within or through this 37-page indictment. And he's speaking to the Russians. He's saying, hey, we know what you guys have been up to. He's speaking to the American public, who has been told by their president for more than a year that this entire probe and Russian meddling was completely a hoax. He's letting them know what the extent of this interference was. And he's also talking to the White House, who has continuously tried to discredit the FBI, the investigators, the attorneys, the legal system. So he is speaking through this indictment and letting people know, especially with elections being around the corner, that this is something that needs to be dealt with. We might not be able to get these people in court and actually prosecute them, but we need to do something about it now because they do plan on interfering again in the future, and the White House needs to do something.
John Cipher, I want you to get in here just on that note here. If this is a messaging document, how strong, how forceful is the message as it comes across in the document?
Well, the message to the Russians is not so much the legal piece of this or suggesting it's illegal, because they certainly knew their actions were illegal. But the message is just how much information is in there, how much data that the Mueller investigation knows. They have to worry a little bit about how much, signals intelligence and perhaps human intelligence led to this indictment. So they also have to assume that there's more information out there that the United States knows and may be able to use in other ways.
Let me just have you look ahead here a little bit, Ken Delaney, and if you would. We were talking there at the top of the show just about all that was attempted here, the organizing of rallies, the paying of actors to play parts at those rallies. What do we know about these unwitting Americans who attended those rallies, and how much is this indictment designed just to be a vehicle for information, that as we head to the midterms in 2018, perhaps more Americans will be aware of what might be insidious behavior that they see on the campaign trail?
I'm sure that was part of it, David. And in fact, John Cipher made a really important point, which is there is a lot of very sensitive information in here that the CIA and the National Security Agency had to sign off on being an illegal document. You would normally not see something this detailed. Great insights from our intelligence agencies on how the Russians did business and who they spoke to. And yeah, absolutely, Robert Mueller is trying to send a message to the country. This is what's going on. You need to be aware of it. He's also trying to send a message, arguably, to the President of the United States, whose response to this really has been shocking. It's been 24 hours since the Justice Department laid out the details of an attack by a foreign government against our country, and the President has not really said much about it at all, except through the lens of his own situation, proclaiming that there's no collusion. David.
Ken, a last question for you here as we just look at this in the context of the wider investigation. Steve Bannon reportedly spent about 20 hours with Robert Mueller's team last week. He also testified before the House Intelligence Committee. He was much less voluble reportedly before that body than he was with the special counsel. Give us just the state of play here when it comes to what the special counsel is looking at, what the House Intelligence Committee is looking at.
I think yesterday was another example of how we don't know what we don't know about this Mueller investigation. The guilty plea from a man no one had ever heard of until yesterday, Mr. Pinedo, suggests that we have no idea who is cooperating and who Mueller has in his sights. But you're absolutely right. He's meticulously assembling a case, both looking into this collusion front and also on obstruction of justice. And there are no signs at this point that the White House and the President of the United States is out of legal danger. This investigation is a juggernaut, and there's no sign that it's ending anytime soon.
Yeah, the man you mentioned there indicted separately for identity theft. Ken Delaney, and thank you very much. Our National Security Intelligence correspondent, John Cipher, Yodit Tewolde, thanks for your time this afternoon as well. And still ahead, the